Commanders fans want to know the third most salary cap space available in the 2025 offseason. Could the Washington Commanders go after either Mekhi Becton or Ronnie Stanley to help shore up the offensive line? I'm going to tell you why they could go after both of them on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside this episode of Locked On Commanders. I am your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday, your friend on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, also helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team. And I want to thank you for coming through for today's episode, in which we are going to talk about tight end pursuits. Why not DK Metcalf or Max Crosby? And we're going to start it all off with talking about the Washington Commanders being big money players this offseason. In our mailbag episode every day, those of you who come through every single day, I want to thank you for doing so. And if anybody out there is not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, thanks for giving it a try. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast, even during the offseason, 5 days a week, all through the offseason, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So be sure to come back again and again, click that subscribe button or follow or whatever button it is on the platform you are here with us on. The NFL salary cap. A memo went out to teams on Wednesday saying that the NFL salary cap will rise somewhere in the area of somewhere in the area of $277.5 million up to $281.5 million for 2025. It's another big jump. It's a second year in a row we've seen a big jump in the salary cap for the NFL following the relatively minor increases in salary cap space that stemmed from the whole COVID situation. Now, if you split the difference here, and let's say you put the Commanders at $279.5 million, or put the salary cap rather, $279.5 million right there in between that 277, 281.5 number. The Washington Commanders would have $82.2 million in salary cap space as it stands today. That is the third highest cap space. It's going to be the third highest cap space regardless, but the number behind the New England Patriots and the Las Vegas Raiders, which means that they have the most cap space in the NFC. And that's going to kind of lead us into our first mailbag question. Insider Bill asks, this time of year, all the questions in my mind deal with free agency and the draft. Makes a lot of sense. Offensive line can definitely be handled in free agency, keeping the draft for skill and developmental positions. With 25-year-old Mekhi Becton from the Philadelphia Eagles and Ronnie Stanley from the Baltimore Ravens on the open market, what are the chances Adam Peters, Commanders general manager, and the Commanders pick up either or both? And I'll tell you, I don't think that they will sign both, but there's a case to be made for signing either one of these guys. Let's start with Mekhi Becton. Younger of the two. He is 25, turns 26 in April, had a very good season with the Philadelphia Eagles, converted into a guard, was a tackle with the New York Jets prior to that. He is going to be an open market free agent if he and the Eagles don't come up with some sort of agreement before March 10th, which is when the open negotiating period begins. We'll get to that here more in a little bit in a second. Spot Track has Mekhi Becton's market value listed as $10.2 million a year for 4 years for a 4-year deal. So talking about $40 to $45 million total contract worth, right? And that's total worth. That's not all guarantees. It's not all that stuff. And the thing about Mekhi Becton is, one, he's younger than Ronnie Stanley. Two, he's going to cost less than Ronnie Stanley because the success that he had, while it's good, is not proven. It's really a 1-year success inside. And the reason there should be some attraction there from the Washington Commanders to potentially pursue a deal with Mekhi Becton should he hit the open market is, to me, it's fairly clear. He is a former offensive tackle converted inside to guard, which means he's got tackle experience, but he's a guard. You need a guard. Sam Cosmi is going to be out. I'm putting the timetable around Thanksgiving. Now, honestly, I do think I'm being a little bit conservative. I think I'm stretching it a little too far into next season when I think Sam Cosmi might be able to return. But for me, that way I'm safe as far as like driving myself crazy over wondering when he's going to come back. Either way, I think October is the earliest you're going to see Sam Cosmi come back from that injury. You're going to need a guard in the meantime to go ahead and fill that position. And if you're smart with the way this contract works, you put some outs in there and all that stuff. Again, Mekhi Becton has tackle experience. So depending on what you do in the draft, depending on what Andrew Wiley is doing, all this other stuff. You have a guy that if you need him for some reason, whether it be a lack of performance or an injury, you have someone who's got that tackle experience. When Sam Crosby comes back, you potentially shift Mekhi Becton back outside and work on that kind of thing. If all goes well and Sam comes back healthy, everybody else is healthy, then you at least have somebody to compete again with Nick Allegretti for that left guard spot, whether it be in season, whether it be 2026, what have you. So that's where Mekhi Becton makes a lot of sense. Where Ronnie Stanley makes a lot of sense. Ronnie Stanley, obviously older, much more established in the league, turns 31 in March. Pretty much everybody I know that knows the Ravens or talks about the Ravens is expecting Ronnie Stanley to hit the open market. Spot Track has his market value $20.7 million per year for a 2-year deal. So much more expensive than Mekhi Becton. But again, if you're watching Commanders, you kind of have that money. Now, with Ronnie Stanley, he's your left tackle. So if he's your left tackle, to me, what I would do here in this situation, if I'm the Washington Commanders, I would look at moving Brandon Coleman to right tackle, the young right tackle, and then maybe you draft another left tackle, 3rd round, 5th round, whatever it is, to develop behind Ronnie Stanley. And I look to move Andrew Wiley from right tackle to right guard. And then when Sam Crosby comes back, I've got Andrew Wiley as my swing tackle, potential interior lineman replacement if a guy gets injured. That's pretty much the move I would make there, because you're basically replacing one older tackle in Andrew Wiley with another older tackle in Ronnie Stanley, but Stanley's a better older tackle. Move your young guy to the right side, use Andrew Wiley's guard experience, move him inside while Sam is getting better. And then once Sam comes back, again, you've got Andrew Wiley who's got reps, he's got time, but he's also got time now to heal and kind of get better for the stretch run. And you can do, more offensive line. I think 5 offensive linemen make Andrew Wiley an eligible, lineman, stuff like that. So personally, I actually like the Stanley idea better, because I think he immediately upgrades your line in total, and it gives you a clearer path to the future. There's not as much ambiguity about, well, what do we do when Crosby's healthy? What do we do with this? What do we do with that? Like Becton does with Stanley. Again, the role is just kind of there, and it kind of gives you a clear path to where you're going to go from when Sam Crosby is able to get healthy and come back. But of course, signing either of these players isn't going to happen for at least, right around another month. And Insider Paul came through, asked a question that I think a lot of insiders are going to have. When can teams start talking to players? So March 10th is the beginning of the open negotiating period. If you watch NFL Network, you're going to hear guys like Ian Rappaport tell you that it drives them crazy to hear people say legal tampering, because tampering by its nature is illegal. So you can't make it illegal. So it's called the open negotiating period, right? It's like saying legal robbery. No, robbery is never legal. Robbery just by itself is illegal, period. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers some people, but it is what it is. March 10th, beginning at noon Eastern time, teams are allowed to openly negotiate with pending free agents coming open, and then they can agree to terms on a contract, but those terms cannot be signed into contract until 4 p.m. Eastern, March 12th. So that's basically the ballpark. Players can sign their contracts as of 4 p.m. Eastern time on March 12th. Now, again, that's the rules. What actually happens, because again, you're going to hear about March 10th, 12:05, someone agrees to a 4-year, $60 million contract. Here's the bonus structure. Here's all this. And somehow we're supposed to believe that they just got that done in 5 minutes. Yeah, okay. These guys are going to start talking sooner, but that is legally when they're allowed to start talking, to answer your question. And then Paul also followed up, do players really want to come here to play with Jaden and this team, or like in the past, they would come here just for the money? Listen, I would say right now, a lot of players in the National Football League want to win. Like, that is their priority. I want to win first. I'll make money along the way to winning. So when a team is winning, like the Washington Commanders did in 2024, and it looks like they have the sauce, the secret sauce to continue winning, yes, it absolutely attracts free agents. Now, some players would love to win, but they're more worried about making money. Okay, those guys, you're going to have to pay them a little bit more. So, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, right? But absolutely, there are free agents out there, pending free agents out there, who look at the Washington Commanders as an attractive option. And I will tell you too, guys, like this franchise, survey stuff is going to come out. That's more of a PR mess than it is anything else. I asked a lot of the free agents assigned here last offseason how much they paid attention to that free agent, or the NFLPA survey for the facilities and all that stuff. And for the most part, I was told not at all. So when that survey comes out, we're going to make a big deal about it. We're going to talk about it. The players, quite honestly, at least from the ones I've talked to, don't care about that near as much as I think a lot of us would think that they do. So good start to the mailbag. We got more mailbag questions coming up. In fact, or including rather, two people who want to know why I'm not talking about two of the bigger names in the NFL who could be on the move. So I'm going to make that right coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by TurboTax. This message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were ever going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with TurboTax experts who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. So get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Continuing now in today's mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, insider Timothy came through and said, what about a trade possibility for Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf? As I don't recall you mentioning that possibility. And Timothy, you are 100% correct. Of course, our last episode before this one, our wide receiver offseason deep dive, talked about some players that could be hitting the open market, talked about some players that are expected to be available via trade. DK Metcalf was not one of them. The reason DK Metcalf was not one of them is because, honestly, there's not a lot of real smoke around DK Metcalf being traded. Now, best I can tell, the source of the smoke from the outside comes from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, who conducted one of his anonymous surveys, which are very popular these days, and I dig them just as much as anybody else does. And in that anonymous survey, there were a number of executives, coaches, et cetera, people in the league who anonymously told Jeremy Fowler that they believe in a poll that the Seattle Seahawks will move DK Metcalf this offseason. And while it's very interesting information, while it's certainly not nothing, it's a lot less than if it was solid intel from either the players camp or the Seattle Seahawks themselves. And so without that is the reason we did include DK Metcalf in that conversation. But this is why I love mailbag episodes. We get the opportunity to talk about some of the things that we haven't been talking about because Commanders fans want to hear about it. So just because I don't see a lot of real smoke billowing up from DK Metcalf's corner or the Seattle Seahawks corner doesn't mean that it won't happen or couldn't happen this offseason. So if it did, what would the cost be? Well, for starters, Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys podcast, by the way, but also 33rd Team, recently speculated that a high second-round pick could potentially nab DK Metcalf and a fourth rounder from the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the second-round pick that he was talking about is the Raiders' 37th overall pick. That's 8 spots after the Commanders' first-round pick, number 29 overall. And their second-round pick, the Commanders' second-round pick is pick number 61, so you're talking 25 spots or so after that. So you're not going to get like compensation. You can't just say, well, it's a second-rounder for DK Metcalf and a fourth, because those are very different numbers. So if you adjust for what Washington has, GM Adam Peters would from my stipulation, either need to give up number 29 in the first round for DK Metcalf, probably get a third-round pick back, which is number 82 overall for Seattle, or you look at giving Seattle number 61 in the second round, which again is much further down the board than what the Raiders would be giving up, and you get DK Metcalf, and you probably get a fifth rounder instead of a fourth rounder, looking at number 173 overall. Now, that's just a speculative trade, process or trade situation. Metcalf, 6'4", 236 pounds, certainly has downfield speed. Just turned 27 in December, so he'll turn 28 this coming December. He is entering the final year of his contract in 2025 and is due $18 million that the Commanders would have to pay if they traded for him. Of course, if you're going to do this deal, you are likely negotiating an extension, which can move some of that money down the road a bit if they wanted to. You don't have to pay all the $18 million of the cap hit this year. Metcalf is coming off of a relatively down year in 2024. It's his third season out of 6 seasons in the NFL under 1,000 yards receiving, second year in a row with 66 receptions and a career low 5 touchdown catches. Now, with that relatively down season, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful here, Geno Smith, not quite the quarterback that Jaden Daniels is. And Cliff Kingsbury, offensive coordinator for the Commanders, not the offensive coordinator the Seahawks had last year, Ryan Grubb, who was fired by head coach Mike McDonald after just one season. So again, the situation matters, context matters. And again, if Washington were to bring DK Metcalf in, I think DK Metcalf would find that it's a much better situation for him than what he's currently sitting in Seattle. Now, they did just hire Clint Kubiak, who was fired after one season as the offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints. But his skill set or Kubiak's history seems to fit a guy like DK Metcalf a little bit more. But look, it was kind of similar to what we talked about with Myles Garrett. If Washington takes the entire $31.87 million cap hit from Seattle that DK Metcalf counts for today against them in 2025 by taking the bonuses, the proration, all that stuff, then they can drive the draft capital down significantly. And then you can negotiate an extension with DK to move some of that money around if you need to. Given that the Seahawks are $11.3 million over the cap currently for 2025, even with that high inflation expectation, that's an attractive option for the Seahawks to get rid of all that money, not have to carry any of the dead cap, while getting a little bit of draft capital back, probably say a third from the Commanders and maybe a seventh for Metcalf and a fourth. Given that Seattle's fourth is number 137, it's pretty far down the list. Projection, that's a projection with compensatory picks. Maybe you make it number 79 overall from Washington for Metcalf, number 137, 187, and a 2026 fourth. I'm just kind of ballparking it here. So, things get a lot more interesting. So look, bottom line is I'm all for it. If the Seahawks are really up for a trade, then I'm all for it. But the reason we're not talking about it as extensively as we could be is because, again, all of the smoke about this is really coming from the outside. None of it right now is coming from the inside. And until it does, we're not going to get too deep into the weeds on it because there's too many other players on the market who have smoke from the inside coming out. Merle came through and said, if I had to bet which edge the Commanders would get this offseason, it'd be Max Crosby in a trade with the Las Vegas Raiders. Says Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have relationships with Tom Brady and Pete Carroll. And I'll tell you right now, guys, Insider Merle is the king of past relationships. Like, he absolutely loves digging up those past connections. And look, a lot of times these teams, these GMs, coaches, they love bringing in guys that they have past relationships for or with, or they love dealing with GMs and coaches, people that they have past relationships with because they feel like they know them better, right? It makes a lot of sense. You'd rather negotiate with someone you know versus someone you don't know, right? So it's very interesting. Now, Crosby is another player that there's some media speculation about him being available for trade, but no real smoke around the Raiders actually trading him. That is, unless they can't get a contract done. So the current situation with Max Crosby, he agreed to a contract adjustment last season that moved some guaranteed money up, that allowed the Las Vegas Raiders kind of get that money off their books faster. But the end result of it is it leaves Max Crosby with no guaranteed money in the final 2 years of his current contract. That is not a situation any player wants to be in. So if Vegas doesn't take care of him, then there's a chance they says, okay, if you're not going to take care of me, even though I helped you out last year, trade me. But that's only if the Raiders don't do the right thing. If the Raiders do the right thing, everything indicates that Max Crosby still wants to be a Raider. Now, Crosby himself in interviews is not steering into any trade rumors or letting on that he even wants to trade. But I will tell you this, he's not necessarily saying he doesn't want to trade either. What he does say is he wants to win and he wants to have guaranteed money back on the books because that's security. Can the Las Vegas Raiders give him the guaranteed money? Sure. Can they give him as much guaranteed money as the Commanders? No. Can they also promise him they're going to win as much as Las Vegas or as the Watch Commanders? No. Does all of that mean that a trade of Max Crosby is imminent? Absolutely not. But if Max Crosby wants a certain amount to say, hey, look, we don't look like we're going to win anytime soon, so I want a lot of guaranteed money to stay here. And the Raiders say, look, dude, we're not going to give you that much money guaranteed. He says, all right, I want out. I would expect, just like I expect the Washington Commanders to, when we get to the end of this Myles Garrett situation, when you always hear, oh, Myles Garrett's going to this team, other teams that were in the mix were blah, blah, blah. The Commanders are one of those teams. If Max Crosby were to actually come available for a trade conversation with the Las Vegas Raiders, I would expect Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders to be involved in those conversations, just like I expect Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders to be involved in the tight end market in the NFL draft, because one way or another, Ben Sin is going to move up, and that means there's a hole at the number 3 tight end position that needs to be filled. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. When the games tip off, The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay easily. My favorite thing about FanDuel same-game parlays. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my favorite team or looking for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I'm missing any of the action. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you can get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Wrapping up today's mailbag episode, the question from Dr. Wonderful, who came through, question about tight ends, asks, this is a really good draft class for tight ends. If we allow John Bates to leave via free agency, use Ben Sinnott as a H-back hybrid, and assuming that we re-sign Zach Ertz, what are the chances Washington drafts another pass-catching tight end? So I'll tell you this. If the Commanders were interested in a pass-catching tight end, they'd have elevated Cole Turner at least at some point this season. And then we're talking semantics here, but basically the day of the pass-catching tight end being something that every NFL team covets, I don't think that it really exists. You've got to be able to block in some way, shape, or form, be either a balanced type of tight end or just be a blocker in general. Now, for the Washington Commanders, Zach Ertz can do that, a little bit. Ben Sinnott certainly has the potential to do that as well. I think the team either re-signs Zach Ertz or they re-sign John Bates. Not both, because I think Ben Sinnott is going to move up the pecking order this year. He's going to move up to that number 2 spot minimum. If it's Zach Ertz that they re-sign, then Ben Sinnott will be the number 2. And you've got a hole at number 3. Cole Turner's not just going to walk into that number 3 job, certainly potentially compete for it, but he's not going to walk into it. If you re-sign John Bates and don't re-sign Zach Ertz, which would be weird to me, then I think Ben Sinnott ends up being your tight end number 1. John Bates stays your number 2, but you still have a hole at number 3 behind John. So that's kind of the way I see that current part of the situation. Now, either way, it leaves the need for a tight end 3. You're probably looking at 3rd round, the earliest for Washington to go there. I would think college tight ends don't get asked to block a lot in today's game, but some of them do get asked to block, and that's important, or they get asked to only block. So we have somewhat limited scopes to really kind of judge these guys, but we do have some guys who are a little bit more established as run blockers as well as receiving tight ends. Texas tight end Gunnar Helm is probably the ceiling as far as quality tight end that the Commanders can get in the draft here, currently being mocked in the 3rd round for the most part. And the Washington Commanders actually do have an earlier 3rd round pick than they're supposed to because of the trade, one of the trades that they made during this last season. So if he's there when the Commanders come on the clock in the 3rd round, he would be very attractive. Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott, Gunnar Helm would be a very attractive tight end room. And you basically have your top 2 guys. You have your top 2 guys for when Zach Ertz rides off into the sunset. Miami's Elijah Arroyo is another potential option on day 2, but he is coming off of a knee injury that stole big chunks of 2 seasons, not just 1 season. LSU's Mason Taylor is another potential day 2 target. On day 3, you got guys like Oregon's Terrence Ferguson, Notre Dame's Mitchell Evans. Those are kind of probably your top 2 day 3 picks. And again, how the board actually falls and what adjustments we make between now and April, certainly up in the air. Though I think that's a little bit early for Washington because they don't have a 4th round pick. So on day 3, Georgia Tech's Jackson Hawes is kind of a John Bates clone, right? Much better blocker than a receiver in college, but he could have untapped potential as a receiver, which is what John Bates had. In fact, they actually have pretty similar grade differentials between their receiving grade and their blocking grade. John Bates was better across the board, but John Bates was also drafted in the 4th round. We're talking about Jackson Hawes being drafted 5th round or later. Right now, most of his mock draft projections are sending him in the 7th round. So that's kind of fair. And then you bring him in to compete with Cole Turner for that final tight end spot on the active roster. And who knows, maybe an undrafted free agent here and there. Don't forget Colson Yankoff is also out there, although he's definitely much more of a special teams guy. But really good question. And yeah, we're going to talk tight ends. We're going to continue our offseason projection or preview series tomorrow, I should say. And as we round out the week, as we get ready to head to the NFL Scouting Combine next week. So we will talk tight ends at another point during this season, off season, but I appreciate Dr. Wonderful coming through for that with that question to get a little bit of that conversation in today. I appreciate all the insiders coming through with their mailbag questions. And for our next episode, we will get back to our offseason preview series. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, all you got to do is text them to me. And to do that, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland in the morning, Tony Wiggins in the afternoon. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. And as always, I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through every day. If you were new to the show, thanks for coming through. Hope you come back again. Either way, until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.